It's Mother's Day. Moms are amazing. And so I'd first like to say hello to my mom, Joanne Schwartz, who's watching the show from her home in Tacoma. Hi, Mom. Miss you. We'll roll some pictures for you. In today's show, we'll talk about the governor's stay-at-home order, and we'll hear from the attorney who is challenging them in 2 lawsuits, and we'll hear again from Deanna Martinez, a nurse in Central Washington. Mike's been getting a lot of questions about this topic, and this should be one of our most interesting shows. You can't be a mom without kids, and our son Grant is here working from home, which we're happy about. So we're going to have him pop in to say hello.
Hi, everyone, and happy Mother's Day.
Thanks, Grant. And also we have our son Nathan. He's graduating this week from college at Washington University in St. Louis. Nathan, can you say hello to everyone?
There we go. Hello, everyone. I'm currently in St. Louis. I will be graduating from college next week. And then after that, I'll be driving back to Washington with one of my roommates who's starting a job at Donnelly in the fall.
We can't hear him, Josh.
That's unfortunate.
We can't hear you. So we'll let you talk. I think the first question we were going to ask you is, how are you doing? You've probably answered that already. What's it like in, we have a technical issue here. What's it like in St. Louis right now?
Okay, so for anybody watching, I can hear them fine. So answering the question, in St. Louis, it's fairly relaxed. People are taking it seriously. The current pandemic, people are wearing masks, and grocery stores are, taking measures and all of that. But it hasn't really hit this area particularly hard yet. I guess I'll put a finger up.
Still having some challenge hearing you. Now I'm hearing myself as feedback. So why don't you explain what you're going to do to celebrate your graduation?
So I touched on this briefly, but to celebrate graduation, it's mostly seeing a few people before I leave St. Louis from a safe distance, and then driving back to Seattle with my roommate and my girlfriend. And we'll be passing through some of the southern United States as we go back. Still haven't figured out exact travel plans, but the hope is to see a bit of Utah and maybe some of Nevada before we make our way to Seattle.
Okay, and did you say what your roommate's doing out here in the fall?
Yeah, so I mentioned it, but just to make sure the conversation flows, he's starting a job out in for Boeing. He doesn't know whether he'll be in Everett or Renton yet, but he does know that he'll be living in Seattle, so that's part of the motivation.
Go ahead and
Great.
finish it out then.
Well, we're super proud of you, Nathan. Can't wait till you get home.
Yep.
So happy Mother's Day to all the amazing moms watching today. You are amazing and appreciated. And now I'll turn this over to Mike.
Thanks, Nathan. Okay, well, we're having some technical issues here. This is a Facebook Live event, and we're doing it from our house. Josh is telling me that maybe my earpiece will work. Okay. So first off, I want to say happy birthday, Mother's Day to Camille, and happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers watching. Today's show covers a topic that many of you have been asking me about. Are the governor's stay-at-home orders legal? How can he shut down some businesses and not others, and require us to stay in our houses without violating our constitutional rights? If we don't agree with those orders, what can we do? Federal Judge Benjamin Settle really summed it up well when he was hearing one of the recently filed lawsuits. He said, "We have all been engaged in a journey through territories never lived by this generation or really any other. Never has the world seen a kind of universal quarantine in the form of required or advised stay-at-home orders from federal and state officials. We are citizens of a country and a state founded on the rule of law. The rule of law is what made our country special, and many soldiers have given their lives to defend the rule of law and to bring it to other lands. We celebrate this week, for example, VE Day, when 75 years ago, the Allies, led by America and Britain, defeated the Nazi regime in Europe. When I was asked about the legality of protests against the stay-at-home order on the Jason Ranch show 2 weeks ago, I said that of course we have the right to seek redress. We are not helpless, but whatever we do, we must do it within the rule of law. And I suggested one good course of action would be to bring a lawsuit asking a judge to allow specific gatherings that might otherwise be banned. Well, the next day, by pure coincidence, the first legal challenge to the stay-at-home order was filed by a candidate for governor, Joshua Freed. Since then, several others have been filed, including 2 by one of our guests today, Joel Ard, who is my former law partner at Foster Pepper. Joel and I went to the same law school as well, the University of Chicago, where former Attorney General Rob McKenna also went. I think we have a picture of Joel and his family at the big eclipse a few years ago in Oregon. Do we have that, Josh? We were there celebrating Grant's birthday. I think we have a picture of that as well. I'll say up front that even though Joel is my former colleague, I'm not going to endorse or even comment on the specifics of his lawsuits, because when I'm Attorney General next year, they may be ongoing, and I don't want to have to recuse myself from the cases. But I thought we could all learn a great deal from hearing him describe the claims the way he would to a judge or opposing counsel. I think you will find this very, very interesting. And we're going to try something a little different today. I'm now going to introduce Ann Donnelly, who is the former chair of the Clark County Republican Party and a businesswoman in Vancouver, Washington. Ann is going to moderate the rest of this show so she can ask me questions as well. Ann, are you with us? Okay. I think Ann is not yet with us. Maybe you can have Camille or Grant call her, and we'll see if we can get her on. Yeah, I'll just roll through this here. Okay, before we get to Joel Ard, we wanted to check in with a nurse that we've had on this show a few times before, Deanna Martinez, to give us a report from the front lines of the battle against COVID-19. Deanna Martinez works as a nurse in Othello and lives in Moses Lake. Deanna, are you with us?
Hi, Mike. Yep.
Okay,
I managed to get home from work in time to join you. Thanks again for the opportunity to talk to you.
And Josh, I can hear her on the big speaker, but not in my headphone. So I hope that's okay. There might be some feedback on the microphone. Okay, Deanna, I understand you were interviewed by public radio this week about your views on striking a balance between preventing the spread of COVID-19 and the economy.
Right. Austin Jenkins approached me after I commented about, it must have been the last press conference that Governor Inslee decided to go ahead and announce the extension of his stay-at-home to the end of May. Originally it was May 4th, and we had a pretty good idea that he was going to extend it. I knew we'd extend farther than the 14th, but the May 31st was kind of a surprise, a shock to me. Yeah. So he asked if he could speak with me regarding my reaction to his announcement.
Okay. Well, this context is very important to the legal challenges you'll hear about in just a minute. Deanna, you were in favor of the stay-at-home order back when you first came on this show several weeks ago. Have your views evolved? And if so, what are they now?
I think so. When it first came out, when COVID-19 first came out, I was kind of keeping track of it as the numbers increased on the west side. And as our hospital started addressing the concerns that we would have for our rural hospital, we moved forward with changing some of our processes and created some plans. actually built our own isolation unit in anticipation of having to care for COVID-19 patients. And we continue to see those patients and continue to care for them. Biggest concern back then was that the facilities, the higher level of care facilities that we often have to transfer our patients to, would be overwhelmed, and we would not be able to care for our patients at the level that they required. So I was definitely on board with the stay home, stay healthy mandate, and was supportive of what Governor Inslee did at that time. As we've progressed and we've got everything down correctly, how we're going to take care of our patients, I think it's time to go ahead and move on and start letting the state open up. I'm certainly not in favor of just everybody opening up and not having some sort of process or safety plan in place. I think everybody should, countywide, local, and the companies, even if they're small business owners, that they form some sort of plan to keep their employees and their customers safe.
Talked about this a little bit before the show started. Kittitas County, which is also in central Washington, was planning to reopen under the governor's phased plan, I guess we'll call it. And then a case of COVID-19 was diagnosed with an employee, I think, at a grocery store, and that has been put on hold. And it sounds like there's a mini outbreak now in Kittitas County. Does that in any way change your views about the balance we need to strike between preventing the spread of COVID-19 and reopening for business?
I think it actually highlights the need for the safety plans that are in place, and really supports what I'm saying, what Inslee and some of the other Republican leaders. We're not about just opening up the state again like pre-COVID. We're really hoping that people will develop these safety plans. And the incident in Kittitas County, having read up on it, they did the right thing. They had the plan in place. They contacted who they needed to contact, the incident committee, so that they could address the issue and try and minimize an increased spread again, or essentially what we call hot zones. For Inslee to expect that there should be 0 positive cases in 2 to 3 weeks before other counties are allowed to request a waiver, I think that's just not reasonable. It's like any other, well, I shouldn't say any other, it is a new virus. It is very concerning, but even the flu, and I don't want to make too much of a comparison to the flu, but because this is very different, we still have flu cases throughout the whole year. So the thought of 0 cases in order to open up the economy, I believe, is unreasonable. I believe the better approach is just ensuring that people have a safety plan in place, that the public health district and the county and local city governments are on board and know what they will do should we start getting an increase in patients or positive COVID-19 patients.
Well, thank you, Deanna. Deanna has been on the front lines in her hospital in Othello in combating COVID-19. I know you had a brush with the threat of COVID-19 yourself. You were self-quarantined for several days while they were testing you because you had some of the symptoms. And we really appreciate you checking in with us and giving us a report from the front lines, because it's so important as this virus, as we learn more about it and as we understand what it's capable of doing and what we're capable of doing, it's important that we continue to learn and use that to shape public policy and our plans going forward. Thank you, Deanna. And by the way, I know you're a mother, so happy Mother's Day. Thank you for taking part of your day to join us.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity, and I know that the last time you had me on, I wanted to and should have said, and I'm definitely saying it now, I endorse you as a Attorney General candidate. I have really appreciated the relationship we've developed professionally, politically. So thank you.
Well, Deanna, as I've said, you're a rising star in the Republican Party, and I know you have not always considered yourself a Republican, but as I've said to anyone that will listen, if you want to win as a Republican in this state, you better find independents and Democrats that share your values and convince them to vote for you. Otherwise, you won't get enough votes. So I love the fact that Deanna now considers herself a Republican, and thank you very much for your endorsement and your support. And we'll talk to you again as this virus continues to unfold. Have a great day.
Thanks, Mike.
Just for those, okay, thank you. Just for those of you that are wondering, we're having some technical difficulties with Ann Donnelly joining us. We really do intend her to be asking me some questions eventually, and I think we'll get her on in time for that. But that's the joy and the challenges of doing one of these shows from your basement. Okay, our next guest is Joel Ard, who's my former law partner, and he's going to talk about 2 lawsuits he has brought against the stay-at-home orders. Joel, are you with us?
I am. Thanks very much.
Oh, great. And look at that backdrop. I didn't know you were living in the state capitol these days.
It's one of those great green screen backdrops that's way better than the background of my home office. So.
Okay. Well, Joel, just to get everyone introduced to what you're doing, because we'll ask you in a little more detail about the lawsuits, can you just give us a brief description of what you're trying to accomplish in each of these lawsuits?
Sure. And I'll start with the education lawsuit brought in Lewis County on behalf of 3 single moms in Chehalis School District. And that raises claims under the state constitution that says it's the paramount duty of the state to provide an ample education to all children. We think that the statewide block on being educated violates that paramount duty. Obviously, nobody wants children to be in danger. You wouldn't send kids into a burning school building. But what we've learned over the weeks about this virus, and virtually every study across the world confirms this, is that kids are at extraordinarily low risk. And we found no evidence really of asymptomatic transmission by children to others. Unfortunately, the governor's phased plans that he's put out have absolutely no mention of anybody getting back to school. Of all the things he says he's thinking about and working on reopening, schools aren't on the list yet. And we think that really portends a failure of the state to provide that education. My plaintiffs, hardworking moms, some in healthcare, their kids are just not getting the education they need streaming on laptops. And I think we all know that, Washington's great teachers teach best in the classroom. And so we're really going to try to put pressure on the governor to acknowledge the science, recognize that what we've learned is really great news for kids about this virus, that there's very low risk and there's much easier ways to alleviate a threat to any kid or teacher who might be at risk than simply shutting down all schools across the entire state. The second lawsuit is brought on behalf of a group of representatives and some private business people and private parties who've been harmed by the ongoing shutdown order, including people who are unable to get vitally needed medical attention, but then also people who are suffering in their businesses. Competitors' businesses have been allowed to operate and theirs have not. Also, of course, as so many people know, not allowed to really worship and practice religion. The relief we're requesting there, and we're in the same court in front of the same judge as Joshua Freed was, is a declaration that these proclamations at this point are unconstitutionally overbroad. That they're really, taking a sledgehammer rather than a scalpel to the problem the state's facing.
You may have just heard from Deanna Martinez, as we did, Joel. And she said the stay-at-home orders were needed when there was a true crisis, a real possibility we might run out of critical hospital beds, but that crisis is over or ending. Is that the shifting of the crisis? Is that part of the theory of your case?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd say a couple things about that. One is I completely agree with what Deanna said. You know, as soon as I filed these lawsuits, people accused me of, wanting to kill old people, as though the only options before us are living under emergency proclamations or complete anarchy. And that's obviously not true. And Deanna recognized that and described all the things that are going on in local communities to help address this problem. When the shutdown order started, the emergency that the governor identified was, in fact, that this could spread so fast and make so many people sick so quickly that we would run out of hospital beds. There were predictions that we'd run out of hospital beds, we'd run out of ICU space, we'd run out of ventilators. The Army built a field hospital downtown to give us 250 extra beds. The governor took a lease on a facility in Yakima to get extra beds. Really what we've seen is great news, Mike. The Army packed up the hospital 3 days after they got it up and running because we realized we weren't going to need it. We sent 500 ventilators to New York where they had really a much graver crisis because ours was abating. And so that's really, those facts on the ground make a huge difference. Is there an emergency in the state such that the governor can rule by proclamation and have these gross impositions on civil liberties? Or do we have a serious problem in the state that needs to be addressed by the normal operation of civil government? And I think it's important to remember that if the governor is not allowed to rule by proclamation, that doesn't mean we have no government and no rule and no mechanism to address this problem. It's that the mechanism we have to address the problem devolves down to addressing the much lower scope of a problem that we actually see. And I think Deanna obviously spoke to that very clearly in her own work on the ground as the hospital ramped up its ability to deal with these patients, and the need for that capacity, thank God, has been minimized. We no longer face the kind of emergency that requires basically lifting all civil government and giving it into the hands of one person.
I understand that Ann Donnelly has joined us. Ann, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can. And
okay.
Can you hear me?
I can, and I can see you, and you look great.
Isn't that wonderful? Thank you.
Happy Mother's Day, Ann.
Thank
I'm going to turn
Happy
this over
Mother's
to you.
Day to you.
Okay, thank you.
And,
hey, Ann, one second.
Go ahead.
Ann. I'm going to turn this over to you after I talk a little bit about my conversation with Governor Evans last week, and then you can pick it up with questioning about Joel. So just so we have a little transition here. And for any of you that watched our show last week with Governor Evans, he talked about the civil unrest over the Vietnam War and other issues happening when he was governor. And that's when the legislature first gave him, the governor, the emergency powers that Governor Inslee is now using. And we talked about the fact that these emergency powers are based on statute. They're not based on the state constitution. And that statute was passed in response to rioting and other civil unrest, which is why it references bans on handheld bombs like Molotov cocktails. Neither Governor Evans nor Slade Gorton, who I talked to this week, Attorney General at the time the law was passed, remember the law being passed, which means it was not controversial at the time. So I think the question is, how does a law passed to deal with civil unrest and riots applied to a health emergency? Well, the law says that the governor must end the emergency declaration when public order is restored. There's no specific time limit on the powers, though. The legislature imposed a 30-day limit on his ability to suspend some laws when it was amended a few years ago, but not on his general powers. So Ann, you want to take it away now and continue our questioning of Joel?
Yes, I'd be very privileged to do that. Mike knows that I have a great and deep and abiding interest in these issues from some of my own writings as a layperson down here in Vancouver, Washington. And I would really like to ask Joel about his 2 lawsuits. How does this language in the statute play into your legal theory? Joel, please address that.
Absolutely. I mean, clearly this law was passed with something very different in mind. Nonetheless, it was used, for example, with the eruption of Mount St. Helens. I think it's appropriate that the legislature recognizes emergencies can arise where we have no idea what it will be, and we have no idea what kind of very fast response might need to be made, be that a volcano erupting, a tsunami hitting the west coast of Washington, or obviously a new virus where the experts predict that it could be such a disaster that the hospital system would be overwhelmed. I think that kind of threat, although the law was passed to deal with rioters, that kind of threat is equally legitimately considered a threat to public order. But as Mike pointed out, when public order is restored, the governor has to give up those emergency powers. And I think anybody who's looked at this statute and read it can recognize how unbelievably extraordinary that power is that the legislature allows him to exercise for a limited period of time. And I think what our position is that when you give somebody that unbelievably extraordinary and broad power, and we see in our day-to-day lives exactly how broad it is, because everything we're doing and not doing is as a result of the governor's solitary edict on it. It's very important that that be ceded back to the people, to the legislature, to the regular organs of state and local government when the emergency is passed. The specific emergency the governor identified was a threat to the capacity of the healthcare system. No model shows a threat to the capacity of the healthcare system. Of course, that doesn't mean no one will get sick. It doesn't mean no one will need hospitalization. It doesn't mean we should do nothing at all. What it does mean is that there's no longer an emergency that justifies government by solitary edict of one person.
Well, thank you. That's very informative. I know that you are a constitutional lawyer, and I know that the Constitution is of great concern to all of us. And I wonder if you could explain to us, given your expertise, how the Constitution comes into play. First, I'll go to you, and then I would like Mike to also follow up from his perspective. So go ahead, Joel.
So, it's absolutely true that the government, even for health reasons, can impose some limits on your constitutional right. And sometimes in the current situation, people get taken aback by that. But an example I would give is, what if the health department showed up at your church and said, well, unfortunately, you've got a rat infestation in the church, and we're not going to let you back in until that's cleared up. Can they close a restaurant for that? Absolutely. Can they limit where you can go if there's a flood, if there's a water main break? Absolutely. These are normal operations of government, that they can, in fact, impose limits on your otherwise pre-existing constitutional rights for public health and safety. But they have to be limited. They have to be limited to the problem at hand, and they also have to be of a reasonable scope to the problem at hand. So with a major problem, you can have significantly more major limitations. For a smaller problem, smaller limitations, and those limitations also go more or less to the area where the problem occurs. That's a very lay description of it. It doesn't use the lawyer's lingo. But on the other hand, I think constitutional law in this area is very commonsensical. And so many people in the state at the outset of this thought, gee, it looks like there's a huge crisis about to envelop us. And when the governor says we should all stay home, that seems like an appropriate response. Well, that common sense feeling that most people in Washington had is more or less reflected in the constitutional rules around this, that to that enormous, apparent, grave statewide crisis, a significantly large action by the government is in fact okay because it's of roughly the same size and scope as the perceived crisis. But when the crisis fades, the authority fades with it. And the response needs to be narrowly tailored, to start using the constitutional lawyer's lingo, narrowly tailored to the government's interest. And as Deanna spoke to when she was talking about the things that local communities are doing, individual hospitals are doing, counties are doing, those are much more narrowly tailored to the individual problems and the scope of the COVID crisis that's going on in those communities. So when Kittitas County says, we're going to start to open up, we have an outbreak of cases, we address those cases, the way they address that may limit some people's constitutional rights, but it'll be much narrower and more targeted a limit than an entire statewide ban on anyone going to church, which is more or less what we're facing right now. So the facts on the ground absolutely tie into the constitutional theory and what government may and may not do in limiting your civil liberties and constitutional rights.
Okay, so now Mike Vasca, what do you think of all of that with regard to the Constitution?
Well, Anne, first off, as my former law partner, I can say Joel is a very smart and a very good lawyer, so I really can't add anything to his summary. I will say there are 3 branches of government in our constitutional system, and 2 are now engaged in resolving issues around this crisis, the executive branch and now the courts. But where is our legislature? We often make fun of our do-nothing Congress, but it has been so active in trying to bring relief to our citizens. Our state legislature, it hasn't had a single day of special session to address all the huge impacts of COVID-19. And Governor Inslee is not taking Governor Evans' advice to work in a bipartisan manner with the leaders of the Democrats and Republicans in the legislature. So really, it's no wonder that people around the state are asking the question of the governor and his emergency powers. They're asking, are they legal? As your next Attorney General, I will work hard to protect your constitutional rights. And as the chief legal advisor to the state, I will work hard to be sure other branches of state government also protect these rights. And I will work as I have as a community leader to bring together the diversity of our state rather than to play one part of the state off against the other in pure partisanship.
Thank you, Mike. That will be a very important advance from where we are right now. If and when you're elected and you accomplish all of that, thank you very much. Now, I believe we do have time for a few questions that I believe are of great interest to the public, especially those who are not constitutional lawyers and they're just watching events unfolding. And I think that they would really like to know that your campaign promises a less politicized Attorney General's office. How would that actually be accomplished, given that you would take office, there would be perhaps some left-leaning staff there who would maybe not have your same approach? How would you change course and make sure your approach was the one going forward?
First off, Joel, I wanted to thank you, if you're still there, for coming on relatively short notice. I know you're very busy with these big lawsuits, and I certainly learned a lot talking to you, and I think our viewers will as well. And to answer your question, Bob Ferguson has made the Attorney General's office an extension of his political views and his aspirations for higher office. He's broken with the tradition of his predecessors, Rob McKenna and Christine Gregoire and others, that it be run as a professional office focused on the rule of law. He's diverted millions of dollars in funding from groups helping vulnerable communities to pay for his 55 partisan lawsuits against the president. I will stop that practice. I have managed teams of lawyers, often very large and often across many states, for many, many, many years. Many of those lawyers were liberal, many were conservative. For professional lawyers, political views were never an issue because we worked as a team for our client. So I'll run the Attorney General's office as a professional and not a partisan law firm. If some lawyers don't like that, I'll work to coach them up. As a soccer coach for many years, I occasionally had players that they said are not coachable. They often became my best players. That's how I'm going to approach the staff in the office.
Okay, well, that's, I think, tremendously important. We now see that in some levels of our government, those who do not support either the president or the attorney general or whatever can actually work behind the scenes against their approach. And so I think we will always have that concern. And I know from all you've said that you will be aware of that. You will work very hard to make sure that your approach is the one that's being followed. So thank you very much for that. Now, turning to an out-of-state case that has the world and certainly our country riveted with attention, the hair salon owner in Dallas who was actually jailed for opening up her studio. Many of us view this as an example of where the government in emergencies goes too far and has indeed seemingly the power to wreck someone's private business and maybe other businesses. What is the answer to this? Is there something between sending people like that to jail? Maybe she has done something illegal. What is the correct balance here, should this occur again?
Well, here's an update on that case. On Wednesday, Texas Governor Abbott called the judge's ruling excessive and said jail time should only be used for the most excessive violations of his orders. He called for that hairdresser's release. He also said compliance with executive orders during this pandemic is important to ensure public safety. However, surely there are less restrictive means to achieve that goal than just jailing a Texas mother. Governor Abbott is a Republican, but complying with the rule of law is a basic American value. If you don't agree with government rules, express your views loudly but legally and work to change the rule or those who make the rules. We have elections this year. You have a chance to make a difference. Double down on your efforts to help elect those who share your values. I'm not aware of people being arrested in the situation of the hairdresser in our state. There are people who are not complying with the rules. They should comply with the rules, but government response needs to be measured and thoughtful. And obviously in the Texas case, it really wasn't.
Thank you. We'll continue to follow that case. We have elections this year, and I think these issues that we're discussing right now are going to become the central issues of the campaign. Now, the Car Tab Initiative 976, it was recently defended by Bob Ferguson and his team, and many criticized the way he carried that out and believe he did not do a full-throated job of defense. But the News Tribune, one of the papers, Longview paper, opined that the state's lawyers are committed professionals with a solid record of upholding the will of the people. So they endorsed what Bob Ferguson's team had done. Where does the truth lie? And how can you be sure that you could defend something that perhaps you did not personally support?
Good question, Ann. First off, I was involved in helping pass a statewide referendum years ago that cut car tabs by $30. It was placed on the ballot by Republicans in the legislature, and it was approved by the voters. Then I was part of the effort to defend our victory in the courts, and we won in the Supreme Court. I could tell you we had none of the personal drama we're seeing right now with Tim Eyman and Bob Ferguson. The fact that there are questions about Bob Ferguson's willingness to defend the initiatives shows how many believe the office is no longer the professional institution that Rob McKenna and Chris Gregoire and others before them ran. Initiative 976 is being defended by the state AG, but also by lawyers for Tim Eyman and by 2 counties. I think the people's will in passing the initiative is being well represented. The Supreme Court has agreed to direct review of the trial court's ruling that the initiative is essentially valid, and the initial briefs are due this week. So that's my update, and those are my views on the case.
Okay, well, we'll continue to follow that case and so many of these others. They're proliferating, and I think the attention will be very strongly upon your views, Joel's views, and you will be of great use to all of us if you can explain these things. So that's all the questions I have, Mike. If there are other questions from others, I will turn it back over to you.
And yes, we're running out of time, but Ann Donnelly from Clark County, former chair of the Clark County Republican Party and a very successful and prominent businesswoman in Vancouver, for those of you who don't know her. Thank you for joining, and let me apologize again for some of the confusion and getting you on.
I think it might have been my fault.
Well, I know I've struggled with the technology, and I think many of us have as we've worked from home, and
Yes.
we continue to learn how to make these things work.
We'll get better.
Yes, we're learning every week. Pretty soon we'll have it down. Okay, well, I'll close by saying to all of you watching, thank you for joining us today. Thanks to our guests, Deanna Martinez and Joel Ard, and of course to our wonderful moderator, Ann Donnelly. Please visit my website at mikevasca.com. If you want to support my campaign, please make a contribution. Happy Mother's Day, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next Sunday at 4 p.m.